don't know what you're trying to do.
Make sure things are working.
Okay.
I still don't have audio working the way it should.
I'll be back.
אולי נפליגה בספינות מחוף אילת עד חוף שהם, ועל המשחטות הישנות יטעינו תפוחי זהב. כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום, זה נכון כאור בצהריים. כל זה יבוא מחר אם לא היום, ואם לא מחר אז מחרתיים. מחר אולי בכל המשעולים ארי בעדר צאן ינהג. מחר אולי באלף גמלים יכו בהמונים שלך. כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום, זה נכון כאור בצהריים. אולי נפליגה בספינות מחוף אילת עד חוף שהם, ועל המשחטות הישנות יטעינו תפוחי זהב. כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום, זה נכון כאור בצהריים. כל זה יבוא מחר אם לא היום, ואם לא מחר אז מחרתיים. מחר אולי בכל המשעולים ארי בעדר צאן ינהג. מחר אולי באלף גמלים יכו בהמונים שלך. כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום, זה נכון כאור בצהריים. מתוך ההריסות. כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום, זה
Hi.
Hello, Rabbi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
The office is open. Your rabbi may be able to help you.
What?
Rabbi may be able to help you.
So, yeah, I gotta figure out.
Oh, do I have to take this one?
We have everything set up, and those leaders were working on this.
Figured it all out.
Proclamation is up there. You can make anything Connie and I forgot you told us. We have reserved here.
So where do you want me to sit?
Where makes it easiest for you to get up?
Probably.
Every little much size.
It is so up to you, Scott.
Which name I have?
Which name I? Typically, the mayor sits like in the center, doesn't he?
He's a
Fran will not have to clap it up.
I don't think so.
Jackson's gonna be here, so. All right, so you've got the proclamation up there.
But those are the bios that are in the booklet. So.
Yeah, so we just had those in case. We have a whole bunch of people said that they were sick, they were planning on coming, they're not, they're sick now, whatever it is, what it is. And beyond. This is what's in the book, so Bonnie just had those ready for you.
I'm just gonna read these abbreviated ones. If people wanna do what's in the,
Right,
so can I just put this up
you
here?
can certainly do that. We have lots of food for tonight. It is more than light refreshments. They just gave us a lot.
Why is-
So if you wanted
is
to,
Ben
that's your
here
short
today?
folks. Here's too funny. We just don't want anybody tripping.
Well, I don't
So
wanna-
over to the front.
I wonder if we can just take it away. I don't think anyone is so short that they can't.
You could probably scoot it right under that, do you think? Just make sure or is that gonna be anybody's way? You know what? Scoot it up here. And just make sure the ugly carpet's showing that it's probably better than the 2x4s. It's another speaker, it's really nice.
Is it wrapping?
Wrapping. Yeah, I always think Le Pen, it's not Le Pen, because he's not Israel. So you got your booklet. I think they look pretty nice. And is Nancy coming? She gonna lead the beast?
No.
Okay, so we want you to take her some food.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so it's kind of self-explanatory. We have to
All right.
make sure we really make nice with Bob Nance, because,
Okay. So when just let me go over this, this event is even more relevant. The alarming increase in the United
Yes.
States of anti-Semitism as well as the increasing hatred targeted. To begin with, I want to thank Rabbi for leading the service And further, following the service, please join us for light
It's
refreshments.
Bargeron, B-A-R.
Oh, there you go.
These French names, you know,
Yeah.
he answers to anything.
Right, that's Rabbi. Light refreshments, and also give some attention to the student projects at the back.
That's
of the
perfect.
social hall.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I go immediately into, it is now my privilege.
To introduce Mayor Tom Henry.
Okay. Okay,
Perfect, right.
okay,
He's got his proclamation right here.
okay.
He knows what to do. What did we decide, if we were going to introduce the governor, or we were just going to play it after
think
Mayor
we were
Henry's?
just
I
gonna
think we
play
were
it.
just going to play it, because everybody knows who Governor Holcomb is, and if they don't, then they don't. So, so you'll need to tell Lee that, to go, as soon as Mayor Henry sits down, to go right into Governor Holcomb's announcement.
How many people? I'm thinking there's not gonna be a whole lot of
No,
people here.
It is what it is.
I know, we can just do what
We
we're
had a
gonna do.
TV station that
Look,
was going to
there's a
show up.
Beautiful me and you.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, look at that.
What was it? TV 21 was going to come, and they
They're
couldn't
sick.
get their cameraman or something like that to come. So they asked if we could send them the link so they can put something on the news tonight. So we're doing that. I know, Scott. I mean, when we had the one 4 years ago, there was over 300 people here. We opened up that back area, but that was a different time. And after 2 mass shootings this weekend, do you think really people want to come into a congregation, a Jewish congregation? I'm serious, I hate to be a downer, but it's
No,
like,
I thought the same
it's
thing.
realistic.
Yeah, it's like, no, we have like essentially one a day. I mean, that's,
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm getting them mixed up anymore. Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
it's beyond crazy.
Right, so we weren't sure for a little while if Carol Jackson was going to come because her mother ended up in the hospital, but she's going to be there. She's going to do her thing. Then you have the candle lighting, and we're not introducing everybody. It's right here. Carol Black, our speaker, will start.
And that's, Mike is doing that introduction.
He's doing that introduction. Yeah, we have this baby covered. Okay, so we're going through the service here. We have everybody doing what they're doing. I think it's laid out pretty well. Okay. We go to, are you on introduce? Where are you at? Did I move too fast? I'm on.
No, I'm in my cottage.
Okay, so we go through that. Do cottage. And then Mike will go up and introduce Carol.
And I'll come back up and introduce Andrew.
Right, right. And I met with him today. He's absolutely wonderful. I did have to tell him we cannot do anything political. You can talk about things, because his talk is mainly about like some of the similarities of what was created by, Father Coughlin and what happened in January 6th. He just can't say Republican.
I don't think anyone's going to call me, but if I put this on airplane mode, that will make
I think so. You could ask Lee, he would know for sure.
Yeah, well, I don't know anything.
Just don't forget to take it off in case you need it. Take it off airplane later. So,
Hey, Lee, if I put my phone on airplane mode, will that make sure that it doesn't ring when I'm in here?
Put it on airplane mode?
If I put my cell phone on airplane mode, will that make sure that it doesn't ring while I'm in the service?
Unless.
could you just turn down the sound volume?
Yeah, I can do that.
He's just gonna turn down the volume, Lee.
Yeah, just from the volume all the way down, that'll work.
Yeah,
Wait a second, so, I think that's this,
it
isn't it?
should be your bottom, it should have, you might have just turned it off. I don't know. I'm not familiar with your phone. Where's your volume? Probably on that side. Check that out with Lee. Right, and then Bob comes
Oh,
in.
here it goes.
Okay,
It's off.
it's off, yeah, so then you won't have any problems. And you could always put it on vibrate if you needed to.
Well, and the other thing is, sometimes when I turn it off, I forget to turn it on for weeks and months.
I know, so that's what I was gonna tell you, too. Make a note, put a sticky on there. Bob's thing from top to bottom should be 6 minutes. The introductions and both videos, 6 minutes. I think Andrew thought there'd be like question and answer. I don't know how come he thought that. I think he just assumed, and I said no, but we're having the light refreshments and the
Okay.
get-together.
This will probably only take about an hour.
Oh, I think probably an hour and 15 or something
Okay,
like that, yeah.
okay.
He was originally gonna do like 40 minutes, but then we were kind of like adding everything up. The service is a half hour.
Okay.
Any way around it.
Right.
And then you got all the introductions. Carol Black's talking for 10 minutes.
Okay, that's 40, yeah.
And you got all this getting up and, you got the governor's thing. You got, so we asked him, we said, can you cut it
Good evening. I'm Scott Salen, President of the Fort Wayne Jewish Federation. I want to welcome everyone to the Federation's 2023 Yom HaShoa commemoration. Today is even more significant. It is the first time in several years that we've been able to be here together to hold this solemn remembrance in person. I'm sorry. We are pleased that you are here this evening. This event is even more relevant today due to the alarming increase in the United States of anti-Semitism, as well as the increasing hatred targeting other minority groups. To begin, I want to thank Rabbi Bergeron for leading the service and all the others, too numerous to name, who have contributed to this commemoration. Further, following the service, please join us for light refreshments and also give some attention to the student projects at the back of the social hall. It is now my privilege to introduce Mayor Tom Henry. Mayor Henry has been a longstanding friend to and a supporter of the Fort Wayne Jewish community. During his tenure as mayor, the city has seen considerable progress in so many aspects. His record as mayor include major development of downtown, job creation, neighborhood infrastructure improvements, as well as advances in public safety and improvements to the city's world-class park system. Please welcome Mayor Tom Henry.
Thank you and good evening. Thank you once again for inviting me. I was talking earlier this evening about how much I really appreciate getting the invitation every year, and I try every year to accommodate that invitation. It's so often that I have to pick and choose some, and anymore my assistant doesn't even ask anymore. She just automatically puts us on my calendar. So it means quite a bit to me to be able to spend a few minutes with you this evening. I do have a proclamation that I'd like to read, but before I do, on March the 27th, I had to sign a proclamation that was very disturbing to me. It was a proclamation that we mayors who belong to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and the U.S. Conference of Mayors are cities with 50,000 people or more in the country, and there's several hundred of us. And most of us signed this proclamation that we forwarded to Congress. And the proclamation essentially said that we have no idea what this country is coming to. The anti-Semitism that is taking place, we thought was in the process of being eradicated. And yet now it's beginning to resurface with an intensity that is totally unacceptable to we mayors. The proclamation dealt with stopping the hatred towards Jews. And that shook me up, it really did, because I have no idea why that's even talked about now. Again, this is something that I thought our generation was in the process of correcting. And yet here I am having to sign a proclamation asking Congress to take this up again as part of their dialogue. Obviously I signed it, but I shouldn't have had to. This shouldn't have any place in this country. And yet here we go again. Well, I wanted to share that with you this evening because, as I mentioned, almost all of my colleagues, all the mayors of these several hundred cities of thousands of people are saying the same thing, that enough is enough. We shouldn't have to do this. So again, thank you for inviting me to keep this aware. We can't forget. With that, I'd like to read the following proclamation. Whereas the Holocaust occurred from 1933 to 1945 in Europe and resulted in the deaths of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims. And whereas the response of the government of the United States and the various organizations and individuals in the United States is a matter of ongoing controversy and debate. And whereas the history of such responses is largely unknown to American audiences. And whereas examining various American responses to the Holocaust provides meaningful ways for Americans to consider responsibilities that are an inherent part of the democratic process. And whereas the citizens of Fort Wayne should study and remember how the United States responded to the Holocaust. So now therefore I, Thomas Henry, Mayor of the City of Fort Wayne, do hereby proclaim April 17th, 2023 is Yom HaShoa Commemoration Service Day in Fort Wayne, and I encourage all of our citizens to note this very special occasion. Thank you again.
Hello, I'm Governor Eric Holcomb, and I'm honored to join you virtually as you gather in remembrance of Holocaust victims and survivors. This is a moment when younger generations can learn and older generations are reminded of the power of hope and healing and respect and responsibility. It's a moment when we honor their survivors, among them dear friends like the late Eva Kor, who, against the odds, devoted her life to being an ambassador of truth and hope to countless people around the world. It was indeed a privilege to present her with the Sachem Award, our state's highest honor, in my very early months on this job. And together with you, I couldn't be more committed to ensuring the memory of so many others who experienced such unthinkable horror that will live on forever and ever as we take those lessons to heart and learn from them. And I couldn't be more sure that our Hoosier hospitality means that we stand against hate of any kind and always seek to build up communities in love. So thank you for ensuring civility, respect, and kindness. They are the lights beaming out from Indiana's lighthouse for all to see, like a beacon of hope, right here in the heart of the heartland.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
This Yom HaShoa worship service, should I go to the other mic?
Yes.
This Yom HaShoa worship service is for those who died in the Holocaust, and it will begin with the lighting of 6 candles. The first candle for those who died in the Holocaust. The second candle for those who survived its trauma and its horror. The third candle for those who resisted the Third Reich's ideology and practices and who rescued people who were the intended victims of the Third Reich of Germany. The fourth candle represents those in groups targeted by the Third Reich of Germany, for persecution and those who had to wear badges. The fifth candle is for those who liberated the concentration camps, the death camps, and the territories under the German control. And the sixth candle is for the generations yet to come. We light this sixth candle in hope for a better world. I will be reading a poem in the form of a prayer by Debbie Perlman. How can we fathom this enormity of loss? Our hearts try to gather in the countless faces. You, Holy One, summon each, images burned in your remembrance. Help us to recall. Help us to recall their lives and their destruction. Bring us to your sacred place of memory, not only to bear witness, but to reassemble faith, to recover the defiled and make it holy. These slender flames are a promise and also a charge, calling us to honor and to imitate righteousness. These flames illuminate truth's horror and hope's future. Your searching reminder, do not forget. Let us bless you, Holy One, touching fire to wick, 6 candles for the lost Jewish communities, for the righteous among the nations, for the victim groups represented by the badges of hate, for the survivors, for the resistors and the liberators, and for future generations. Let us bless you, Holy One, for you dry our tears, you comfort martyred souls, you bring us shalom.
אשרי הגרפר שנשרף והצית להבות, אשרי הלהבה שבערה בסתרי לבבות, אשרי הלבבות שידעו לחול בכבוד, אשרי הגרפר שנשרף והצית להבות. As we look at these lights, try to imagine 6 million candles, each one with the name of another Jew. Each one would signify a unique and precious soul who struggled and had hope, who was part of a family, an orphan, a widow, or a widower. They worked, studied, took walks, the ordinary things of life. They all were part of the Jewish people.
Blessed is the match by Hannah Snesh. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the heart's secret places. Blessed is the heart that knows for honor's sake to stop its beating. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Each one suffered. Each and every one was murdered. They are lost forever, their light extinguished. We are the light now. Only by our remembering can they live again in our hearts and minds.
Creator of all, source and shelter, grant a perfect rest under your tabernacle of peace to those who perished in the Holocaust, our fathers and mothers, our sisters and brothers, our rabbis and teachers, our neighbors and children, the named and the unnamed, whose lives were cut off by brutal, vicious, cunning, and calculated violence. May they find peace in the world to come. Remember the survivors who have since passed away, and the virtues of our people who died at the hand of malice in every generation.
We remember the works of their hands and the messages of their heart. Bless the defenders of Israel with safety and strength, and the righteous of all nations who provide protection, shelter, and comfort to the Jewish people. Let their deeds be a source of favor in heaven and healing in earth. Put an end to anger, hatred, and fear, and let lead us to a time when no one will suffer at the hand of another, speedily in our days. May the memories of all who faced these horrors be sanctified with joy and love. May their souls be bound up in the bond of life and living blessing in our midst.
Fully compassionate God on high, to our 6 million sisters and brothers murdered because they were Jews, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold them in the embrace of your wings, secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. They will rest in peace. Amen. I will now chant the prayer El Malei Rachamim, which we hear at services of memorial and at funerals. And the prayer, while spoken with a broken heart and perhaps in great bereavement, it is a prayer that wraps the prayer in God's compassion. I'll invite you to please rise as you are able. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Baromim, Hamsem Menchana Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'ma'alot Kedoshim U'Torim, Kol Zahar Harakia Mizrahim, את נשמות 6 מיליון אחינו ואחיותינו שנהגו על קידוש השם. בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם ויחנו בשלום. Amen. You may be seated. After the Horror by Alden Salovey. Hold fast to the breath of life. Hold fast to the song of life. Hold fast to the soul of life. This is my sacred duty, God of old, as survivor, as witness, as a voice of history and truth. Why else did I live when so many died? Why else do I stand when so many were put to rest? Why else do I hope and yearn when so many were silenced? Hold fast to awe and wonder. Hold fast to radiance and light. Hold fast to mystery and majesty. This is my sacred duty, God of old, as mourner, as testimony to horror and destruction. What else remains? What else endures? What more can you ask of me but to choose life in the shadow of death?
The Kaddish is considered the prayer for mourners, but it is not a prayer for the dead. Actually, there is no mention of mourning for the dead in the Kaddish. Its theme is the affirmation of life, the greatness and holiness of God, the quest for peace and holiness in our own lives and the lives of all people. Kaddish is an opportunity to recognize our own mortality, to consider the ephemeral nature of our being, and to contemplate the purpose of our presence on earth. We remember the lives of those who went before. In their goodness, we draw comfort from the contribution they made to our lives and to the lives of others. The Kaddish is a solemn declaration of faith in accord with the Jewish reaction to death, affirmation of belief in God's reign. Tonight, we will recite the Kaddish Yom HaShoa, which includes the names of the camps and ghettos where so many perished during the Holocaust. We hold the memory of each soul close to us. The English translation of the Kaddish follows. Exalted and hallowed be God's great name in the world, which God created according to plan. May God's majesty be revealed in the days of our lifetime and in the life of all Israel, speedily, imminently, to which we say, Amen. Blessed be God's great name to all eternity. Blessed, praised, honored, exalted, extolled, glorified, adored, and lauded be the name of the Holy Blessed One, beyond all earthly words and songs of blessing, praise, and comfort, to which we say, Amen. May there be abundant peace from heaven and life for us and all Israel, to which we say, Amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us, to all Israel, to which we say, Amen.
Please rise. יתגדל
Auschwitz,
ויתקדש
Luz,
שמי רבה
Ponar,
ואלמד יברח חירותי
Babi Yar,
וימליך מלכותי
Majdanek,
בחייכון וביום אחרון
Birkenau,
ובחיי דקו בית ישראל
Kovno,
בגלה ובזמן קריב
Janaushka.
ואמרו
Amen.
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח,
Theresienstadt,
ויתפאר ויתרומם,
Buchenwald,
ויתנשא ויתהדר,
Treblinka,
ויתהלל ויתהלל,
Vilna,
שמי דקודשה בריחו,
Bergen-Belsen,
לעילה
Mauthausen,
מן כל ברכתה ושרתה,
Dachau,
תוש בחתה ונחמתה,
Minsk,
דמירן בעלמה,
Warsaw,
ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, בחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. You may be seated.
I'm pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, Andrew Lappin, a man of quite considerable talent and creativity. His professional work has been wide-ranging, including journalism, film criticism, media analysis, and podcasting. While continuing to engage in multiple media activities, he is currently managing editor for local news at the Jewish Telegraphic Agency and book critic for the Michigan Alumnus. He previously served as editor for the Detroit Jewish News, which received 13 awards from the Society of Professional Journalists Detroit chapter during his tenure. Would you please welcome Andrew Lappin.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Federation of Fort Wayne for having me. I've brought along a slideshow, which we will get up here in a minute. Again, my name is Andrew Lappin, and tonight my talk, which is called Radioactive, is going to be about the ways in which the Holocaust was understood as it was happening in America, and in particular by one American who spread a certain ideology to millions and millions of people. Next slide, please. So first off, as a representative of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, I feel it appropriate tonight to talk a little bit about my day job, where I am a reporter. JTA is a historic wire service and news outlet that covers the Jewish world. It has been around for over a century, and the most salient point tonight is that JTA was one of the only news outlets that was covering the Holocaust as it was happening, with people on the ground in Europe breaking important stories like the massacre of Baba Yar, as well as the mass exodus of Jews from Europe, and every beat by beat when so many other news outlets were in the dark and so much of the world was in the dark about what was happening in the Holocaust, JTA was covering it, and we carry that history very heavily. It was not always appreciated at the time. The New York Times and the Associated Press were among the news outlets that dropped their subscriptions to JTA because they felt that its coverage of the Holocaust was too biased in a pro-Jewish manner. And so we are always working to cover the Jewish world and to alert the wider world to the threats around it. For a lot of people, the Holocaust may feel like distant memory, but for me, covering the day-to-day world of the Jewish world, it often exerts itself in the current headlines, and so I wanted to share a couple examples of that. Next slide, please. Recently, I told our readers about the Nazi history of a certain athletic company that had a sponsorship with a celebrity who espoused pro-Nazi views and took a long time to distance itself from him. This was a very widely read story among our readership. Next slide, please. This was just last week. A high school in Florida had decided that an illustrated adaptation of the Diary of Anne Frank was inappropriate for high school students, and so banned it from its school. So these are the kinds of stories I'm covering on a regular basis. Next slide, please. Sometimes the stories hit a bit closer to home. Profiled a couple Indiana public figures who suggested that teachers should remain neutral on the issue of the Nazis. Next slide, please. But for me, the way in which I most sense the Holocaust in my modern life was this building, this church, which is in Royal Oak, Michigan, a Detroit suburb, about a mile from where I grew up. It's called the National Shrine of the Little Flower. It's still an active congregation today. As you can tell from from the photo, it's a very majestic building. The architecture is grandiose. It's on this very busy thoroughfare. Many people see it. It has this very distinctive carving of Jesus on the cross. And when I was a kid, and I would pass by it many times. And one day my dad said to me, "Do you know what we used to call this church when we were younger?" Because he grew up in the area as well. And I said, "No, what?" And he said, "The Shrine of the Little Fascist." And that was how I learned that the founder of this church, the church was founded in 1926, that the founder and head priest at the church not only was a fascist, not only was an anti-Semite, but was in fact the leading voice for fascism and anti-Semitism in America. And in fact, this majestic church was built with the listener donations he made from his radio show that espoused fascism and anti-Semitism. And this was how I learned about Father Coughlin. Next slide, please. So Father Charles Coughlin was known as the radio priest because, as I said, he did have a radio show, which at first was the means by which he broadcasted sermons to the public and to a wider version of the public that went beyond his initial parish. His radio show he maintained for 14 years. And in the span of that time, that moniker, radio priest, went from being a sort of novelty act, no one had ever heard of a priest on the radio before, to something a lot more sinister and a lot more dangerous. Next slide, please. So to fully capture Father Coughlin's legacy for you, we need to hit a couple major bullet points. As I said, he spent about 14 years in the limelight where he had a nationally syndicated radio show from the years 1926 to 1940. He also had a newspaper which he called Social Justice, and he published that until 1942. So we're talking about a total of 16 years where he had some semblance of a national platform and was reaching Americans all over the country. At the height of his popularity, which would have been in about the mid-1930s, he was reaching an estimated 30 to 40 million Americans every week with his radio show, which was about a quarter of the country at the time. So this is a size of an audience that is bigger than the combined totals of every cable news TV audience today. So we're talking a really considerable reach, considerable power, considerable voice within the media landscape. And what he did was really truly unique at the beginning because radio was a brand new technology, but it was so widely adopted by so many Americans that by the time he started, which was just a couple years after the radio came out, almost 1 in 3 of every American households had a radio, and they were listening to him every week. He was a very exciting character at first because nobody had ever thought to listen to a sermon on the radio instead of going to church before. But over the years, he started to embrace first an economic populism, a kind of hardscrabble politics that he would blend with his teaching of Bible verses, and then from the economic populism would venture into conspiracy theories and and soon enough into first crypto anti-Semitism and then outright anti-Semitism. And so this was over the course of several years with people listening to him week after week. He received a major boost during the Great Depression, which came in 1929, when millions of Americans were out of work. And during this time, he became their voice. He became one of the only people in the public eye who was saying, the American institutions have failed you, and it's time to rise up against the elites. By the elites, it soon became clear that he meant the Jews, but people were listening to him and were fully bought into his message, so much so that even when they had no money during the Great Depression, they would send Father Coughlin what little money they had. That was how much they believed in what he was saying. So we see that Father Coughlin, in the first decade or so of his career, was building up a really mass following, which then in the late 1930s, he was able to mobilize into a violent extremist political movement. And this is when America really starts to feel the full horror and specter of what the Holocaust meant, and what it meant that millions of people could be swept up into a hateful ideology. Next slide, please. So we're going to listen to a clip from Father Coughlin's radio show now, if you wouldn't mind playing this clip.
I know how the followers of Marx crushed out liberty in Russia, Spain, and elsewhere. I know what they would do in the streets of New York and Detroit and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia today if they thought they had power to accomplish their ends. Before they grow more forceful and powerful, and it will not be long until they will have done so, before then, it is time to eradicate them mentally, spiritually, and physically from our midst. Thus, the combat today is between the so-called popular front and the Christian front. It is a combat upon whose outcome the destiny of America hinges. It's a destiny of happiness and victory for labor, or misery and slavery for labor. Where do you stand? What do you plan to do? Which emblem do you want to fly alongside the stars and stripes? The hammer and sickle, or the cross of the crucified Redeemer?
So this broadcast would have been in around 1938, 1939, when the more extremist followers of Father Coughlin were in full force. And this is a synthesis of what his rhetoric had become by this point. He is speaking essentially in code to them. He's talking about the followers of Marx, which of course on the surface he's referring to communists, but Father Coughlin had a history of when talking about Karl Marx, referring to him as a Hebrew, and making this point that was a popular conspiracy theory at the time called Judeo-Bolshevism, which essentially held that Jews were the secret puppet masters of the entire communist ideology, and therefore were a threat to anyone who wanted to practice religion anywhere. He is also making a pretty explicit call to violence among his followers. He is outright saying over the airwaves that it's time to eradicate, the people who threaten us. And he is cloaking it all in an Americanism. He is saying this is the proper way to be. This is the American way to be. And so this was sort of the full extent of what he was able to do as a demagogue. Next slide, please. And in fact, I do position that Father Coughlin was America's first mass media demagogue. Certainly there have been demagogues before and after him, but the fact that he came around right at the start of this brand new medium for mass communication, the likes of which our society had never really encountered before. The speed and the power with which he was able to disseminate his message was beyond any that we had ever seen or were ever prepared for. And so it was only natural that someone was going to abuse this power. And so as Coughlin's desire for political power of his own rose, his need to wield his instrument, his voice, and his messaging to achieve those ends became more sinister. And so he did what every demagogue does. He exploited the fears and prejudices of the masses while pretending to be one of them. Next slide, please. So why was this messaging so successful? Why did he reach so many Americans? Some of the important points I have already touched on. The fact that this was an early early era for radio, that it was a medium that was almost completely unregulated. The fact that at first he was sort of purely religious, and he sort of let the he let the anti-Semitism seep in over time, or maybe came to believe it himself over time. The rise of the Great Depression and the fact that there was so much economic anxiety in the air in America in the late 1920s and leading into the 1930s, which was also the period of greatest anxiety as far as obviously tensions rising in Europe, but back on the home front, a severe distrust of foreigners, including the many Jewish refugees who were trying to get into the country because they were trying to flee Hitler's Europe. There were strict quotas at the time on how many Jews could enter America, and there were some very xenophobic people in power, and there was a lot of fear and mistrust of both foreigners as well as established institutions like the government and like the banks, which of course had failed everyone during the Great Depression. And so all of these things together was sort of a potent stew, and it made the idea of fascism actually something that was being discussed as a contemporary political idea. Should America be a fascist country? Should America be perhaps a Nazi country? These were things that the Americans at the time, and certainly Coughlin's followers, were fiercely debating. It was not settled matter. It took a very long time. It took years for the United States to actually say that it was not going to be that kind of a country. Next slide, please. So all of these things combined, and the one that I forgot, which was the protection that Coughlin was granted by the Catholic Church and other institutions at the time that were looking the other way as he grew power. It accumulated in the mid-1930s. This was about 1936. In actually a pretty explicit bid for mainstream political power. Coughlin forms a third party, like a political party, called the National Union for Social Justice, claims to be speaking again on behalf of the working man, recruits a sitting member of Congress to run for president under his ticket, and goes on tour and holds big rallies. He's packing the stands. He is delivering his message directly to the people with a great amount of theatricality. And at these rallies, he is starting to fully embrace the anti-Semitism that he has been propagating, and he is saying things like, "We know we're a Christian nation here in America. We believe to love your neighbor as yourself, but I challenge any Jew who hears this to tell me that they don't believe in the same thing." He is making these sort of direct and sweeping accusations against the Jews, and his audience is cheering. They're cheering every line. Next slide, please. But something else is happening around this time, which is that as Coughlin is trying to become more respectable in the mainstream, he is also becoming more and more extremist in his views and in what he is saying publicly. And so after 1936 and his campaign for president fails, he starts very quickly embracing the more fringe elements of his followers and going deeper and deeper down this sort of rabbit hole of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. When you go down deep enough, you can reach a conclusion that the Jews run everything, which of course was the conclusion that Hitler and the Nazis were operating under. And in Coughlin's case, this came to a fore in around November of 1938. These were the events of what is known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. This was when mobs of people across Nazi-occupied parts of Europe, egged on by the Nazi authorities, took to the streets, stormed through Jewish neighborhoods, smashed the windows of Jewish businesses, set synagogues on fire, drove thousands and thousands of Jews from their homes, many of whom were rounded up and sent to concentration camps, many of whom were killed. This was historically, we look back on this moment and we say that this was a prelude to the death camps. This was the moment when it was clear just how far the Nazis were willing to go to eradicate an entire people. The Western world is broadly horrified by the events of Kristallnacht, but Father Coughlin on his radio show tells his followers that actually maybe the Jews deserved what happened to them. Maybe they had grown so big and so powerful, and everybody knows, of course, that they control the media, and everybody knows they control the financial systems, and so maybe this was just the last straw that everyone else was pushing back on them. And so Coughlin makes this speech. He has sort of finally severed his bid for mainstream respectability. Radio stations are beginning to drop him one by one, but he hasn't lost all of his followers. Next slide, please. And so this is when he is actually in his most dangerous period, his last couple years on the air. He has encouraged the growth of, I mentioned this, this group of violent extremists. So this was called the Christian Front. This was a paramilitary group that of young men, and they considered themselves ardent followers of Father Coughlin. They would listen to him every week. And on his radio show at this time, Coughlin was saying things like, the communists are such a serious threat that, and they're going to come and they're going to take everything that we love, that we need to form a Christian force, a Christian front to fight off all of the evil that is coming America's way. And won't someone please start a Christian front? And so this group of men did, and they called themselves the Christian Front. And not only did they listen to Father Coughlin, but they were meeting in secret with weapons. They were heavily armed. They were having target practice, and they were also concocting a very real plot to overthrow the U.S. government on Coughlin's behalf. And they, about a dozen of them were rounded up and put to trial in 1939, 1940. And because Father Coughlin has been so prominently supporting this group, everyone is asking, will you take responsibility for the Christian Front? Will you call off their violent campaigns? And this is what Father Coughlin does in response. Next slide, please. And we will play the clip.
And now, my friends, the title of this address is I Take My Stand.
Coughlin went on the air for his January 7th, 1940 radio address, only a few days after the 17 men had been arrested. He made it clear immediately that he supported them.
All week long, the daily papers and newsreels, particularly those of the East, have been headlining and screening a fantastic story of an alleged seditious plot to overthrow the government of the United States.
He said those suspected of the crime had been taken prisoner by the FBI for political purposes.
Some public officials intimated that the government was playing politics with the Department of Justice. My name has been linked adroitly to this plot to overthrow the government.
Many were calling on Coughlin to disavow the Christian Front, which had been chanting his name as they went out to commit acts of violence and destruction. He refused.
While I do not belong to any unit of the Christian Front, nevertheless, I do not disassociate myself from that movement.
Instead, Coughlin egged them on.
I re-encourage the Christians of America to carry on in this crisis for the preservation of Christianity and Americanism more vigorously than ever, despite this thinly veiled campaign launched by certain publicists and their controllers to vilify both the name and the principles of this pro-American, pro-Christian, anti-communist, and anti-Nazi group.
So here we see all of the hallmarks of a media demagogue in his language. He is downplaying and denying the threat. He's calling it an alleged plot that's concocted by his political enemies. He is also refusing to back down, and he is continuing, in fact, to fully support a group of extremists, even as he claims to be distancing himself from them. And he is using a great deal of double talk. He is sort of reversing all of the accusations that are flying against him and his group. He is saying they are pro-American when in fact they were trying to overthrow the U.S. government. He is calling them anti-Nazi when in fact many of them had direct ties to Nazi agents in the United States. And he is calling them fighting for the preservation of Christianity. But this is not any recognizable form of Christianity that I know. And so in these ways, Coughlin is using the tool of the media to protect himself and to cause havoc and chaos. Next slide, please. Coughlin, of course, was not acting alone during this time period. Some of you may be familiar with the America First movement, the America First Committee, led by Charles Lindbergh, who was a World War I aviation hero. This was a movement of isolationists. They sought to keep America out of World War II, which was frequently framed as the Jews' war, as not a war that America needs to be involved in. And so, of course, a lot of this rhetoric would also not just tiptoe, but sort of head full on into anti-Semitism. A much more extreme group at the time was called the German American Bund, and they held this infamous rally, which packed Madison Square Garden in 1939. And this was a group that explicitly wanted America to align itself with the Nazis. You can't really see the image, but there's sort of a decal of George Washington next to swastikas and next to the American flag. And so this was very much, this was what this group was advocating, that America should align with the Nazis and against the Jews. And the leader of this group praised Father Coughlin from his mantle during this rally. Next slide, please. So this was sort of the nadir of Father Coughlin's influence on the American public. The deplatforming of him had already started to begin. There had been, campaigns from various American Jewish groups trying to alert people to the dangers of having someone like this be such a visible presence. These efforts accelerated as radio stations started to drop his show, and then finally, when this trial happens for the Christian Front, the Catholic Church has become suitably embarrassed by Coughlin's activities that they present him with an ultimatum. They say you can either have your radio show, but leave the priesthood, or you can stay a priest. You can stay within the good graces of the church, but you have to give up your radio show. And he chooses the latter. And so he remains a preacher, but he soon shuts down Social Justice magazine as well. And America, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, it does indeed sort of go all in on the war effort. And so it is quickly not becoming a popular mindset to be an isolationist and to push the sort of outrageous lies and conspiracy theories that Father Coughlin had been doing. Next slide, please. And so Coughlin continues to preach in obscurity for 23 years at the Shrine of the Little Flower in Royal Oak. So this is up until the 1960s. He remains a presence at the church until his death in 1979. And about 13 years after that, Shrine issues a public apology for Father Coughlin's anti-Semitic rhetoric, which brings us back to the image that I saw, that this figure was in my backyard, and this was the impact that he had on the American public. Next slide, please. So this lecture is a condensed version of a podcast that I made. I spent years researching Father Coughlin and trying to understand what he meant today. And so, why did I make this, and why am I telling you about it today on Yom HaShoa? Next slide, please. So you don't really need me to tell you this, but anti-Semitism is still a very real and very prescient threat in the United States. Violent anti-Semitism remains a horrific problem. It has not, as others have stated tonight, it has not been eradicated in the decades and decades since the Holocaust. Next slide, please. So not only are Jews being targeted at places of worship and out on the street and going to the supermarket, but there's sort of a new realm of where anti-Semitism is thriving, which is the internet, which actually harkens back to what Father Coughlin was doing on the radio. It is another space that is an unregulated space that is a space of intense amounts of information going every which way, and a space where many people are liable to fall into echo chambers and into spaces where they take in information, misinformation, disinformation, things that are not true, deliberate distortions of truth, conspiracy theories, and this is a space in which we see that there are still corners of this world where the kinds of anti-Semitic beliefs that led to the Holocaust continue to thrive. Next slide, please. Sometimes the parallels can be even more overt, as in recent armed efforts to overthrow the government that recall the Christian front. So the Christian front image is in the upper left. The upper right is an image from anti-vaccine protests in my home state of Michigan. And then the bottom image is from January 6, 2021. Next slide, please. This brings us back to the church, back to the shrine, and the reason why I wanted to embark on this project. About a year ago, after my show had come out, the shrine announced that it was holding an event on Jewish Catholic relations to bring together local Catholics, including parishioners, as well as local Jews, some of whom had never set foot inside the shrine, but all of whom knew the story of Father Coughlin. And it was a pretty miraculous event. And I'm ending here because I found it inspirational in some ways that these groups of people could come together. They could talk about this uncomfortable history. The shrine made a pledge at this event to rethink and reapproach the way that it frames Father Coughlin's history. For years prior to that, they had not really talked about his anti-Semitism. They had avoided the subject, and they were making a commitment now to actually find a way to tackle the subject head on and educate their own parishioners and educate others about it. And so that job does not have to fall to Jews anymore. And this is something that I take with me. As I said, we tend to live through history every day at a Jewish publication, but as long as humans, as long as Americans have the potential to learn from history, to actually learn its lessons and grow and change as people and carry it with them, then we can avoid repeating the horrors of the past. And then we truly can fulfill the promise of never again. Next slide. Thank you very much for your time. Again, the podcast that this talk is derived from is called Radioactive, the Father Coughlin Story. You can find it on wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find my reporting through the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. I want to thank the Federation again for having me.
Because we have several people tuning in on YouTube, I'm going to read the biography of Carol Black. Carol Black is a recently retired licensed clinical audiologist. She owned and operated the North Hills Hearing Aid Center near Pittsburgh for 33 years, and prior to that, had 11 years of audiology in medical settings. She received her bachelor's degree in speech and hearing science and a master's degree in audiology, both from the University of Pittsburgh. She serves on the steering committee of the 1027 Healing Partnership and participates with the group of Pittsburgh families Bridging Kindness. She is a survivor of the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue shooting in 2018, where her brother was murdered. She lives in Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania, with her husband. She's the grandmother of 3 children. Carol Black has come to us to share a story that began as hate-induced trauma and eventually became a message of love and support. Her message tonight is centered around the theme of resilience. Carol, the beam is yours.
Hi. I wanted to thank the Jewish Federation of Fort Wayne for inviting me to come and speak to you tonight, and it's an honor to be here. I'll tell you a couple of things I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about the events of the day, October 27th, 2018. I'm not going to talk about the trial, which is going to begin on April the 24th with jury selection. And I'm not going to talk about the death penalty. Those are topics that I'm not comfortable talking about, at least until after the trial concludes, which Lord only knows when that's going to be. But what I do want to talk to you about today is resilience and hope. I spoke earlier today to a group of students. What was the high school? Columbia City High School. And I did get some interesting questions about that. One of the questions I received was, had I experienced anti-Semitism before this? And I thought about that, and actually I remembered that when I was in 4th grade, I went home from school one day and I said to my mother, "What's a dirty kike?" And she was appalled. She said, "Where did you hear that?" And I said, "Oh, one of the kids said that." And I don't remember her saying anything more about it or whether they did anything about it, but I made a decision that day that being Jewish was something that needed to be hidden. And I did. Now, I grew up in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, which is a very small town south of Pittsburgh, has a population of about 11,000 people, so it's hard to hide things in a town that small. Everybody knows everybody's business. But I did not advertise being Jewish, and I wasn't very actively, and I wasn't involved at all with Judaism for most of my adult life. And I used to, on Saturday mornings when my brother would go to services, I met a friend of mine, a colleague, and we would go for a 5-mile run around the lake in North Park and talk about ears, which is what we did for a living. And I did that for years until I injured my hip. And I couldn't run, and I thought, well, now what am I going to do? And I decided, well, okay, I'm just going to go to services with my brother. And that's what really got me involved back in Jewish life. At first, my first thought was, boy, are these services long. But as I got more familiar with them, I got to like them, and I looked forward to going. And after a couple of years, my brother and I became the Gabbis, which for those of you who don't know what that is, maybe there's some of you who don't know, they are the people who assist the person reading the Torah because the Torah needs to be read correctly. And if the person reading the Torah makes a mistake, we're there to correct them. And as far as I know, we might have been the only brother and sister team of Gabbis in the United States. I don't know if there's another one somewhere. But at any rate, that's when I got back involved in Jewish life. And I really didn't even remember how to read Hebrew. I had been to Hebrew school as a kid, and because I wasn't involved in it, it's just a skill set that eluded me. And so when I started going back to services, I asked our rabbi if he would teach me how to read Hebrew, which I think is how I became the Gabbai. You know, it was like I said to him, "Can I be the Gabbai?" And I had an adult bat mitzvah at the age of 64, which was in 2016. My mother was still alive at the time, and she was just filled with pride that my brother and my sisters and I were all on the bima at the same time. It was a really prideful day for her. And I started going every week. When my hip healed, I resumed going to the lake with my friend, but I would leave immediately so that I could go to services. And it's become a very important part of my life. I'm very involved with the shul. The shul is a very small congregation, and it's mostly older people. When I'm one of the younger ones, it's an older congregation. And in 2017, our congregation got to the point where we could no longer maintain our building. And we sold our shul to the local Chabad, and we moved into the Tree of Life building. The Tree of Life building housed, when we joined, 3 congregations, the Tree of Life Or LaSimcha, and New Light Congregation, which is the one that I belong to, and Dor Hadash. And all 3 congregations were present in the building on October the 27th, 2018, and all 3 congregations lost people that day. I can tell you that was the worst day of my life. I hid in a closet until I was rescued by the SWAT team. They're my heroes. And my brother didn't make it out. There were 22 people in the building and only 11 people made it out of the building alive. You really teed it up for me there, Andrew, with the talk about anti-Semitism. Yes, it's alive and unfortunately seems to be thriving. After that day, I was filled with survivor's guilt. It's a very real thing. I couldn't understand why I was alive and my brother was dead. And it took a few weeks, and I thought I really needed to go and talk to somebody about this, so I sought out a trauma therapist. And she's really made a difference for me. During the COVID shutdown, I didn't go for probably about a year because I would have been forced to do teletherapy, which didn't really appeal to me very much at the time. But as I thought that the trial was going to start, I thought I should get back involved with her, and I still see her today, and she does make a huge difference for me. Immediately after the shooting, I heard gunfire in my head really for a couple of months. It was hard to sleep at night. It was hard to eat. Interestingly enough, when the gunfire stopped keeping me awake at night, I heard earworms, and what I refer to as earworms is just music. It doesn't have any beginning, it doesn't have any end, it's just the middle of music over and over and over again all night long. I actually preferred that to the gunfire. And that lasted for a couple of months, and then, things got a little bit more peaceful for me. So I started making some decisions about what I needed to do to take care of myself. 1 week after the shooting, I went back to services because I knew that's what my brother would want me to do, and the congregation needed me. So it's like a small family, and I went there to help my family. And as Mike told you before, in my professional life, I owned and operated a hearing aid business and audiology practice, and I had no employees. And so the boss told me, you better go back to work if you want to have a business. So I went back to work. And it really helped to occupy my thoughts during the day. I could concentrate on other people's problems instead of dwelling on my own. And then about a month after the shooting, the other family members who lost people, we decided that we were going to start meeting, and we meet once, we still do, we meet once a month. These are people that I did not know prior to the shooting, and we're like a family. We all know how each other feels because we all experienced the same loss. And about 6 months after the shooting, those of us who survived the shooting started to meet, and we still meet. And initially, we all talked about our individual experiences of that day. We don't talk about that much anymore at all, but we've become very close friends, and we share a bond that, unless you've lived through an experience like that, you don't know how it is. A resilience organization began in Pittsburgh. I'm not even sure, I think it was about 7 or 8 months after the shooting. They received a federal grant, and it became the 1027 Healing Partnership. And what we do, I serve on the steering committee of that group. There are about 9 of us that lead the direction that the group is going to follow. And we provide supportive services to the community, the Squirrel Hill community, which is the neighborhood of Pittsburgh that the shooting took place in. There's a big Jewish community there, and a lot of synagogues and temples are in that area. And we reach out. There were so many people in the community that were so deeply affected by this. And from my perspective, I thought, I lived through it, but other people were so deeply affected. And like with the 6 degrees of separation thing, it's probably only about 2 or 3 degrees of separation in Pittsburgh. And everybody in that area knows somebody who was affected or knows somebody who lost somebody. And it's been an organization that has been very beneficial to a lot of people in the Pittsburgh area. A subgroup of the 1027 Healing Partnership is a group that's called Families Bridging Kindness. And it was started by a few of us who either survived the shooting or lost a family member in that. And we were all so deeply appreciative of the support that we received, cards and letters from people from all over the place that were just so kind to us and made us feel so comforted and loved, that we decided, and it's unfortunate that we need to do this because these shootings just seem to continue to happen. They're not all anti-Semitic shootings, but because we know what it's like to be in that situation, we decided to form this group to reach out to other communities who are affected by hate crimes. And I'm involved with that group also. So even though it was a very dark day in my life and the most awful experience I can imagine that I hope nobody else ever has to go through, the silver lining of that dark cloud are these people that I've met who are so meaningful to me and add so much to my life. There have been 2 documentaries that have been filmed in Pittsburgh that pertain to October the 27th. One of them is currently available on HBO Max. It's called A Tree of Life, the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. It's an 80-minute documentary. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. It's a very powerful film, and it deals a lot with what happened in Pittsburgh that day, but also deals a lot with some of the ugly themes of anti-Semitism. The second documentary that was filmed is called Repairing the World, Stories from a Tree of Life. It's not currently available publicly, but it is going to be on PBS in the fall. I think she is releasing it on October the 27th. And that documentary deals more with Pittsburgh's response to the shooting, whereas the first one deals more with the events of the day. They're both very powerful films. I have a small part in both of them, and I guess I'm now getting used to speaking in front of cameras, speaking in front of a room full of people about this. It is what I feel needs to happen. And so if I get an invitation and it sounds like something that I think I can do or I want to do, I feel it's important to get the word out because I just don't want to see anybody else have to go through this. What is also important to me is I don't want anybody to forget the names of the 11 people we lost that day. So I'm going to read those names to you. Joyce Feinberg, Yidis Butchka bat Abba Menachem. Rose Mallinger, Razel bat Avraham. Jerry Rabinowitz, Yehuda ben Yeheskel. Cecil Rosenthal, Cecil Chaim ben Eliezer. David Rosenthal, David ben Eliezer. Bernice Simon, Bela Rochel bat Moshe. Sylvan Simon, Zalman Shachna ben Menachem Mendel. Dan Stein, Daniel Avram ben Borach. Mel Wax, Moshe Godol ben Yosef. Irving Younger, Yitzchak Chaim ben Menachem. And my brother, Richard Gottfried, Yosef ben Chaim. Thank you again to the Federation for inviting me, and thank you all for listening.
Between July and September 1942, German SS and police carried out the mass deportations of 265,000 Jews from the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw, Poland, to the Treblinka extermination camp. By early 1943, only 70,000 Jews remained, at which point Jewish underground resistance groups began to organize. Initially armed with little more than pistols and with no military training, 700 young Jewish fighters stunned the SS, forming them to retreat outside the ghetto. But on the eve of Passover, April 19, 1943, German troops re-entered with orders to destroy the ghetto, triggering the largest uprising by any of the trapped Jewish communities throughout Europe during World War II. During this ordeal, one of these Jewish fighters, 24-year-old Hirsch Glick, composed a song which you will hear in the first of two music videos which will culminate our program. It's a song of defiance, intended to give courage and hope, performed by Theodor Bickel in Yiddish, the language of the ghetto, at a Jewish Young People's March of the Living commemoration not far from the Auschwitz death camp. The song, Sag nit keinmal as du gehst dem letzten Weg, Yiddish for don't ever say that you are on your final way, became the anthem of the Holocaust, sung even among some of those being herded into the gas chambers. It took the German army 27 days to destroy the ghetto, and on May 16, 1943, German General Jürgen Stroop announced to Hitler that, quote, the former Jewish quarter in Warsaw is no more, end quote. In Israel, this cataclysmic destruction of European Jewry is seared into the national psyche. Earlier today, as it is done every year in Israel, a nationwide 2-minute siren sounds, which brings the entire country to a standstill. People stop whatever they're doing. People exit their cars, and everyone stands silently in place and at attention. In contrast, the second video which will immediately follow the first without further commentary, takes us from Holocaust despair to the optimism and hope of new lives represented by Israel's rebirth and regeneration, built in significant part by Holocaust survivors, their children and grandchildren. This song, Machar, which is Hebrew for tomorrow, was composed in 1967 by iconic Israeli songwriter Naomi Shemer, was composed and was set against the backdrop of then escalating war threats by Egypt, Syria, and Jordan to annihilate Israel, the threat of another possible Holocaust only 15 years following Israel's establishment. Consistent with a sense of national relief brought about by Israel's swift defeat of all three armies in what became known as the Six-Day War, the song expresses the nation's undying optimism, fervent hope, and a longing for peace and universal well-being. It also has become an anthem, but a different kind of anthem, because of the message of its opening stanza. Tomorrow, perhaps our boats will set sail from the coast of Eilat to the Ivory Coast, and on the old destroyers they will load oranges. This is not a fable or a dream. All of this will come tomorrow, if not today, and if not tomorrow, then the day after. It's the right walk-off music for today, given the day's indictment of hate and its consequences. We must leave with an abiding resolve that we will all help to make a better tomorrow. There are translations of both of these songs. Obviously, one is in Yiddish, the other is in Hebrew, and they are on pages 10 and 11 of your booklets. I would urge you to read them. The words are very meaningful, and the video will start, after which we invite you to join us in the social hall for some light refreshments. Thank you.
Listen. Listen. Shh. Listen to the stillness. This is the stillness of the voices that were taken away from us. People who lived here and there and 2 streets away, Motri-Birtik. Voices that were taken from us. We are the voices that are left. We must be their voice, carrying their song. And so we will do the hymn of the survivors, of those who fought and those who survived. Never say that you've walked the final way, though leaden skies obscure the light of day. The hour we longed for will certainly appear, and our steps will proclaim we are still here. Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg, Gott schimmeln bleine, verstell und neue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgedenkte schon, es wird abbeugt von unser Trockner seinen da. kommen wird noch unser ausgedenkte Show. Svettag beugt an unser Trott, wir seinen do. Vom grünen Palmenland bis weißen Land von Schnee. Wir kommen heut mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und jeder spritzt, was ist gefallen, unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Gwure, unser Mut. Von jedem spritzt, was ist gefallen von unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Gwure, unser Mut. Das Lied geschrieben ist nicht Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Liedl von a Vogel oder frei. Das hat a Volk zwischen fallendig gewinnt. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hände. Das hat a Volk zwischen fallendig gewinnt. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hände. Da sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Hat Schimmeln bleiene, verstellen bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Sveta beugt an unser Trott, wir seinen do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Sveta beugt an unser Trott, wir seinen do.
People remember heartwarming ads, so to help you remember the
מחר אולי נפליגה בספינות מחוף אילת עד חוף של הר ועל המשחטות הישנות יטעינו תפוחי זהב כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום זה נכון כאור בצהריים כל זה יבוא מחר אם לא היום ואם לא מחר אז מחרתיים מחר אולי בכל המשעולים ארי בעדר צאן ינהר מחר אולי באלף גמלים יכו בהמונים שלך כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום זה נכון כאור בצהריים כל זה יבוא מחר אם לא היום ואם לא מחר אז מחרתיים מחר יקומו 1000 שיכונים ושיר יעוף במרפסות ושלל כלניות וצבעונים יעלו מתוך ההריסות כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום זה נכון כאור בצהריים כל זה יבוא מחר אם לא היום ואם לא מחר אז מחרתיים She